Hello everyone, welcome back to Gray Brick Creations. My name is Michaela, and today I'm going to be showing you my process for putting the image of a beetle, seen here, onto this wood cutting board. I started off this process by printing off the beetle pattern I was going to be transferring onto my wood cutting board. I just created a circle that was about the same size as the cutting board and then placed the beetle inside of it to kind of get an idea about how big I needed to make it. After printing it out, I just cut out the beetle using regular scissors, and I did print it on just regular white paper. No special paper needed here. After cutting out the beetle, I'm going to place it on the cutting board and get it centered, and then I'm going to get it taped down. First on this one, I decided the beetle was a little bit too small in my first print, so I made it a little bit bigger. And now I'm going to go ahead and get this one taped onto the cutting board. After getting the image taped onto the cutting board, I'm going to take some carbon tracing paper. I just got this paper at Hobby Lobby, and it just basically has carbon on one side so that when you push on it, it transfers the pattern onto the wood. And I just place that under my paper that has the beetle pattern on it. And then I just go over it with a pencil or a pen, whatever you prefer to use. You go over the whole outline and it transfers that whole image onto the wood. I generally prefer to use a pencil when I'm doing this tracing. I just find it easier to see what I've already traced over if I use a pencil, because it kind of leaves that gray slate color over the line that I've already gone over. This helps to make sure that I get every single line, and it also helps me to make sure I'm not going over lines multiple times. Not that that would be a bad thing, but it would just take me more time. Also, when I'm doing these tracings on my cutting board projects, I typically try to work from top to bottom. I just find it easier to trace that way. And now here you can see the final image traced onto the wood cutting board from the paper. You can see the lines on there. It looks like I pretty much just drew it on there with a pencil, and that is going to be the outline for when I start wood burning. Now that I've got the image on the board, I'm going to get out all my wood burning materials, my actual wood burner, and the tips I'm going to use. I have quite a few wood burning tips, so I'm going to go through them, take a look at a few of them, see which ones might be best for this specific project. I need something that has a thin tip that can create kind of like a thin line, as the beetle pattern on this board is pretty small. So I need something that's not going to create like a thick line. After looking through all my tips, I'm going to end up using this one. It's kind of like a little shovel, but it has a nice thin edge. And then I'm also going to end up using another wood burning tip to fill in the dark space that I will be showing you later in the video. Once I get my wood burning machine turned on and adjusted to the right temperature, I'm going to go ahead and start burning. Kind of similar to when I'm tracing the pattern on, I typically like to wood burn from top to bottom. and I try to, depending on what shape I'm doing, I try not to drag my hand over the traced on pattern too much as it can rub off sometimes. Now that I've got a good section of the line work done, I'm going to go ahead and fill in the dark space. I'm going to be using this little tiny burning tip that has a little ball on the end. I want the dark space to be filled in kind of with dots. I want it to look like a specific pattern throughout the whole piece. I think it'll just give it like a nice texture and it'll look more consistent than if I try to fill it in with lines or like a shading type tip. Here you can see that dot pattern filling in and it's turning out exactly like I want it to. Like I said, kind of giving it a different texture, but a consistent texture, which doesn't always happen when I'm using more of a shading type tip. Sometimes when I use the shading tips, it can create a lot of different lines, and sometimes there are different thicknesses and different depths in the wood, which can all change the way that the finished product looks. There were a few details on this beetle that were a little too small for me to get a line in to outline the shape. So what I did is I just left it and then I outlined it with the um, tip with the small ball on it instead of like doing an actual outline. You can kind of see that on these two spots on this beetle's head. You can see here that this tip is a little bit more red than when I first started filling in the dots on this piece. And that's because as I work through the different types of wood that these cutting boards are made out of, sometimes I have to turn up the heat if it's a harder wood, or sometimes like on the lighter wood, I have to turn down the heat because it's a lot softer and it'll just like burn a hole in the piece of wood instead of actually showing the pattern that I'm trying to get. And same with that, if I leave the temperature down and it's a harder piece of wood, it just won't even burn, or I'll have to hold the um, burning tool there for a longer amount of time to get it to actually burn. Here you can see that full top section filled in with the dots. I really like how this turned out on the top, so I'm definitely going to continue this way for the rest of the project. Now it's time to get started on the upper section of the beetle, kind of like the, I would call them like the antler portion of the beetle. I did have to adjust my temperature on my burner a few times while I was going through this section of the beetle, just because there's a few different types of wood here. And I also had to adjust it because when I'm doing the line work, if it's too hot, it'll burn a thicker line basically. So on a few sections, I had to turn the temperature down so that I could get a nice thin line and so we could actually see the detail on the finished product. Something else that I've found is kind of important when I'm doing these wood burning projects, especially if I'm burning large dark portions of the wood, is to have a small fan in the room. It just creates a lot of smoke when I'm burning on these, and there are chemicals on the cutting board that I'm sure should not be coming back into my face and into my nose. So I just set up a small desk fan. It has a USB plug on it, and I turn that on while I'm burning. Here I'm just switching back to that kind of flat spoon-like tip. in order to make some more thin line details. Throughout this section of the beetle and down towards the middle back of the beetle, there's not a lot of dark fill-in color throughout the pattern. It's more just like lines that are the pattern. So I really wanted to be careful on these sections because sometimes on the sections that have the dark dot fill-in pattern, I can fudge the lines a little bit and go over the lines a little bit and it'll still look okay. But in these parts where it's just the lines, there's really not any room for a mistake. So these took me a little bit longer. I went nice and slow and made sure I got every little line detailed in there. After finishing up the kind of upper back or upper head section of the beetle, I decided to move on to the shell portion that would probably be covering the wings. First, I wanted to get this section filled in. I kind of switched back and forth throughout the project between doing the line work and doing the dot work. That just keeps me occupied for a little bit longer. If I work too long on the line work, it seems like I get bored, or vice versa. If I work on the dot work for too long, then I get kind of bored and want to move on to something else. So it helps me to stay focused if I switch back and forth between the two different burning techniques. This portion was really fun to do. It almost reminded me of creating like a walnut shell. I don't know why it reminded me of that. I just felt like the shape and the pattern almost looked like a walnut shell. So I thought that turned out really cool. Throughout this whole process, as I finished up each different section, I felt like the beetle just kind of took on new life, and I just liked it more and more as I continued on through the project. The next step for me was to complete the wings. These also had a lot of really small details in them, and I had to keep the original picture close by so that I could remember where I needed to actually fill in dark and then what sections stayed light. Here you can see that first wing all filled in. It's really coming together nicely. The whole pattern looks really clean and really detailed, and I'm super excited to see how the finished product looks. Another reason that my little desk fan comes in handy during these projects is because when this smoke is coming back up into my eyes, sometimes, especially when I'm doing these projects that have these really small details, it can burn my eyes and then it makes it hard for me to focus. So if I keep that fan on, it just tends to blow that smoke kind of away from me, out of my eyes, and then I can see more clearly what lines I have left to burn and what I'm working on. All right, now I'm going to go back to this tip with the little ball at the end to fill in this second wing. Just like on the other side, it was important for me to keep the original picture close by because I needed to be able to tell what I needed to fill in and what stayed just the natural wood pattern. While filling in the last section of this leg, I noticed that I actually missed some of the pattern in the leg. There's supposed to be some little triangles down in here, so I just took my normal pencil and drew them on. You can't see them super well in this video. They're a little bit easier to see in person. I'll show you a bit of a close-up here next so you can see what it actually looked like to me in person versus what it looks like on the video. There you can see it a little bit better. For some reason, in a lot of my artwork lately, I've been really interested in bugs like beetles and moths and butterflies. I just feel like they look so pretty and they're like tiny and fragile, but they can also be kind of cool and tough and have kind of like a dark, spooky side to them. I don't know if that means something, that I've been interested in that kind of thing lately, but if you guys think it means something, drop your comment down below and let me know what you think. All right, I'm just finishing up the last portion of line work on this leg, and then I'm going to go ahead and fill in the dot work after I finish up the lines, and then I'll be all wrapped up on this one. I've been kind of busy doing some other projects lately and testing out some other hobbies, so it was really nice to get back to some classic wood burning for me. This is really the type of project that I enjoy doing and creating. All right, now it's time to reveal the final finished product. This turned out to be one of my favorite cutting boards. I just think the detail on it looks so beautiful. It looks so clean, and hopefully I can find a home for it soon. Once again, thanks for watching.